are now tuned in to the Lineman Lounge.
How's it going, everybody? It's your boy Evo. I am here late night with you tonight. NFL Week 4 is kind of coming up to a wrap. We still have our Monday night game tomorrow, but based on some fan requests, we're running the late night lounge, where we're going to be going over everything that happened today in the NFL, some of the major storylines, made headlines, and it's going to have definitely a fantasy football focus. The intention of this is just to be a real quick recap, so that way, hopefully, when you wake up tomorrow, because again, it is 10 o'clock here in Arizona, so East Coast, it is after midnight, but you can wake up on your Monday morning, drive into work, and then just put my sexy, soothing voice on so you can hear a little bit of a recap of what happened in the NFL yesterday or today for me. But this isn't going to be like a hardcore breakdown like you're going to find everywhere else on ESPN, even though I believe I've got almost 3,000 words of notes here to go over for us in this show. But hopefully it'll help you with some fantasy implications and help you set up your rosters, things like that. So let's just go ahead and get jumping into this. It's going to be a nice quick show, I believe. And yeah, we'll get started off with our first game. So in the early morning show across the pond in London, the Falcons faced the Jaguars in which is like their second home out there, because the Jaguars have played out there more than any other NFL team. The game seemed like a rout pretty early on and ended up with Jacksonville getting a win in Wembley, 23-7, after dropping their last three matches that they played in Europe. Jacksonville will be playing next week again, so we believe that they're staying there in Europe for this entire week. A big reason why the Falcons were only able to score 7 points centered around the play of their quarterback, Desmond Ridder. Ridder had been having a good year so far, especially considering he only had one previous turnover, but that narrative changed today completely. Dez threw 2 interceptions and lost a fumble while being able to throw for over 200 yards today. But there were some bright spots, though, for Falcons offensive players, with Bijan Robinson running for 105 yards, receiving another 32 yards. So a really good day for him, and he's solidifying himself as an RB1 in fantasy football. The bigger name to watch here, though, might be at tight end, and it isn't Kyle Pitts. It's Johnny Smith of the Falcons. He's someone that I'm actually going to be looking for in my fantasy league, potentially, because tight ends have been just woefully bad this year in fantasy football. But Smith's production is seeing steady increases over these past couple of weeks, and it peaked today. Jonnu has had at least 6 targets in the past 3 games, with his lowest reception total being 4. In PPR leagues, this is sort of target share is going to be very valuable on this Falcons team. As we know, tight ends are a good safety blanket a lot of times for younger quarterbacks, and Des Ridder hasn't played a full year yet. He put up 6 catches today for 95 yards as well. That's a really good target share and good production from him. And when you have such dearth at the tight end spot, that's something that you're going to be watching for and definitely is going to stick out. On the other side of the ball, the Jaguars were able to get the win, but Trevor Lawrence still is kind of looking out of sync. He barely eclipsed 200 passing yards today and had 1 lone offensive touchdown for the Jaguars. The rest of the scoring for the Jags came from their kicker, Brandon McManus, and a 61-yard interception return from Darius Williams. But the biggest fantasy contribution in this game kind of came from Christian Kirk, who's quietly having a really solid wide receiver 2 style season, at least a flex play. But today he had 8 receptions, 84 yards. In PPR leagues, that's fantastic. Engram also had a solid day at tight end. But the other thing of note is Calvin Ridley. So Calvin Ridley's fantasy day looked decent on paper because of the touchdown that he got, but it came from a blown coverage. He actually only caught 2 passes on 2 targets, and the 2 target share is not great in what should be a really good passing offense. And he only had 28 total yards. So if you have Ridley on your roster, he might be a guy that, based on his name alone, you might be able to put in as part of a trade or trade outright to boost up another position that you got. He's someone that, while he can have those big games here or there, I think right now more people are riding on the name than the production that we're seeing from him this year. So you might be willing to pull the trigger on a trade if you're trying to get rid of him. Next up, we had the Dolphins and the Bills, and the Bills proved why they're at least amongst the top 2 or 3 teams in the AFC. They beat the Dolphins 48-20. Miami might have been experiencing that hangover after their 70-20 win over Denver last week. And while they should still probably be considered one of the most explosive offensive teams in the AFC, they showed that they still have a lot of work to do to be able to hang with the big boys like Kansas City and the Bills. Josh Allen, great day today. Threw for over 300 yards, 4 passing touchdowns, along with 1 rushing touchdown. So 5 total touchdowns there for Allen. Stephon Diggs, he was the biggest benefactor, had a fantastic day. 6 catches, 120 yards, and 3 touchdowns. But the biggest fantasy note concerning the Bills really revolves around James Cook. And I have a weird feeling about James Cook. I'm not super sold on him like a lot of people are. And their rushing attack in general. It's something that, both me and Sleeveless Mike have been banging the table for a while, is that they need to bring in better runners there to solidify that running game. Trade for Jonathan Taylor. But he didn't have a terrible day by any means. Let's see here. He had 12 carries and a touchdown, but only recorded 29 total rushing yards, which isn't that much, and only had 1 catch. And the workload at running back is also, it's a platoon system there. It was spread out amongst 4 other players, including Josh Allen. And you saw the likes of other players putting up as much, if not more, rushing yards than he was, even though he got twice as many carries as the next player, which I believe was Latavius Murray. It just kind of shows that he might be limited to more of an RB2 or even a flex type spot consistently. And he'll have those really good days where he's definitely an RB2, maybe an RB1, but he's kind of that low-end RB2 or flex player, in my opinion, especially if the Bills are able to make a move for someone by the trade deadline. For the Dolphins, look, if you have Raheem Mostert, you're probably upset for not selling high after last week's performance. I know that I did. I actually got a trade offer sent to me for Raheem Mostert. I had already been considering, like, hey, how can I move this guy? Because he was the number 1 rated running back on ESPN standard fantasy leagues, or PPR leagues, I should say. But there was a lot of reasons to think that this was not going to be a consistent thing. He ran today for 9 yards on 7 carries, had a couple fumbles, and his main competition, Devon Achane, figuring out how to say that correctly now. He had 101 yards and 2 touchdowns running the ball. Mostert also had 3 catches for 36 yards, which is decent for PPR, but I mean, that's not even, we're not talking flex numbers. And with 2 fumbles and one of those fumbles actually being lost, you're taking away points. Look, Mostert has been great this year, but you have Jeff Wilson, who's going to be coming back soon. You have Achane, who is really coming into his own and looking to be almost more explosive. Mostert's fast, but Achane is more of a solid runner, it seems like. And then you look at Mostert's injury history. He hasn't been able to stay healthy for an entire season. It's spelling, a downfall for Mostert. He is not going to retain that number 1 running back status. And if you can still try to move Mostert, I would try to do it. It's the safest play. Get someone, even if it's just a 1-for-1 swap with another running back, you could get someone like a Najee Harris, who I am not a fan of. He's going to put up flex numbers for you at least. And Mostert, you just don't know what's going to happen with him. Another person to kind of watch is Braxton Berrios. He's starting to get a little bit more play out there with Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. He's carving out a decent role, and it's actually cutting into this target share of guys like Waddle. Berrios had 6 catches today on 6 targets with 43 yards and a touchdown. And with how explosive an offense that Miami has, it is worth kind of watching him to see if maybe his role is going to expand further in the following weeks. He's not someone that I'm going to go and pick up unless I just have like a freebie spot on my roster, because I feel like he's another week or 2 stash and see what happens. But for me, he's someone that I'm going to put as interested on my list of players out there, someone that I'm going to watch just because, again, this offense is so explosive. Next up, we have the Broncos and the Bears, game that no one but the hardcore fan bases for both those teams really wanted to watch, a toilet bowl, if you will. Um, Denver was actually down 28-7 at one point in the third quarter, but the Bears just couldn't let that stand and proceeded to give up 24 straight points and secure their loss, 28-31. Both Russell Wilson and Justin Fields had solid days as passers, which was interesting. I mean, Wilson has looked a lot better this year. I think his arm isn't as toast as it was, but uh, it still just isn't really working out there well for Denver and Russ and with Sean Payton, who had to have his sleeves cut off today because he wants to be baby Belichick. But they both passed for over 300 yards. And Fields passed for over 300 with 4 passing touchdowns. And I know people are going to be like, hey, Justin Fields has kind of figured out he's fantasy relevant. And I think he always will have some fantasy relevance. But there's just instability. And this is more of an indictment of Denver's defense, which is chocked full of really good players. And Vance Joseph is just schematically not getting those guys to work well. It's really surprising because Vance Joseph is a good coach, but you could see him very quickly being the person that's going to get a lot of blame pushed on him. And he could get fired here in the next couple of weeks if they keep having showings like this. Focusing on fantasy, though, for the Bears, Khalil Herbert. Dude, had a good day. Rushed 18 times, 103 yards, had 4 catches for 19 yards and a touchdown. DJ Moore also had a good game, 8 receptions, 131 yards and a touchdown, but you can't really expect that to be a consistent thing because the passing game there in Chicago is rough. For Denver, the biggest news, though, that I saw revolves around Javonte Williams. So he suffered a hip flexor injury, took him out of the game pretty early, and paved the way for Jaleel McLaughlin, a guy that I had never heard of. He had an excellent game, ran for 72 yards, caught 3 passes for 32 yards, and had a touchdown there as well. The good news for owners of Williams is that he's not expected to miss much time, but you can look to add McLaughlin as a handcuff potentially if you're concerned about Williams' health. Because right now, Samaje Perine is the primary backup. McLaughlin is the third stringer. But if Williams were to actually go down for a long period of time, you're probably going to see much closer to a 50-50 split with McLaughlin being the higher upside player there. Moving out to Cleveland, it was a bad day for Mike's Brownies, dropping a big-time divisional match to the Ravens, 28-3. Lamar had a limited passing day, only throwing for 186 yards, but he did have 2 passing touchdowns, and then he also was able to put up 2 rushing touchdowns with that. The Browns, on the other hand, had to trot out their rookie quarterback, DTR, to replace Watson. And both myself and Mike have been high on DTR, and we were really excited to see what this rookie could do. Unfortunately, he just had a really rough day. He went 19 for 36, 121 passing yards, 3 interceptions, though. That's the really tough one. This coupled with a rushing attack that just didn't really develop, led to a rough outing for the Browns, who are now 500 on the season. A big concern for Browns fans is going to be the status, though, of star defensive end Myles Garrett, who's really in the running for Defensive Player of the Year right now. He had his left foot bent under him while he was tackling Lamar and was in a protective boot following the game. They still have to do x-rays and scans on that to see the extent of the injury, but hopefully for him and Browns fans, he's not going to be off the field too long. Sticking with teams out of Ohio, Cincinnati Bengals continue to surprise the NFL, and not in a good way. Since he dropped a game to the Titans here in Nashville, 27-3. It was a really awful day all around for the Bengals, with nothing really relevant for fantasy other than their star players just are not performing to the level that you would expect. A lot of players that were taken high are not getting you those points that you want. Burrow was only able to throw for 165 yards. Jamar Chase had 73 yards and 7 receptions, which is good, but not that wide receiver 1 first-round pick expectation. And really, this is revolving around Joe Burrow's health. It's not improving. The offensive line looks terrible. And it might be wise to shy away from Bengals offensive players in fantasy football until Burrow has recovered. For the Titans, on the other hand, they were once again able to beat a team that they had no business being there with. They did it with the Chargers as well. Tannehill didn't have any sort of a special day because the majority of the focus was on the running game. Tannehill had a couple turnovers, Whereas Derrick Henry, he had 22 rushes for 122 yards and a touchdown, and he also threw for a touchdown today. And that's right, Derrick Henry threw for more touchdowns today than Joe Burrow did. The one player that I'm going to continue to bang the table for, though, here with the Titans as someone to stash is their rookie running back, Tyjae Spears. Tyjae Spears, he had 5 runs, totaled 40 yards. He also had 3 catches for on 4 targets. If the Titans were to become sellers before the trade deadline, because this still does not look like a very good team, Derrick Henry could be a guy that gets shipped off for a lot of return. Tyjae Spears, or if there's an injury, any reason why Tyjae Spears steps into more of that starting role, he could be a very good pickup and someone that you're able to get off the waiver wire and have them immediately jump in and become like an RB2. So if you're hurting for running back or you have space on your bench, he is definitely someone to stash. Moving on, we have the Rams, and they continue to surprise as well. At least they're surprising me because I didn't expect them to get very many wins this year, but they had another solid showing in an overtime win versus the Colts, 29-23. Anthony Richardson was back in as a starter. He showed that he was kind of what we're expecting him to be. He's developing as a passer, and he's an electric playmaker, especially with his legs. He completed less than 50% of his passes, which is the accuracy issues that we were expecting to see, but he was able to still gain 200 yards and 2 passing touchdowns despite that. He also ran for 56 yards and another touchdown. There's just the instability with him of, is he going to be able to stay on the field, because he is taking a lot of hits right now. And that's why he didn't play last week. Zach Moss, also another solid outing. He's solidifying that spot at running back for him. He is definitely an RB2, low-end RB1 in fantasy football. And he's making Jonathan Taylor much more expendable via a trade for those Colts, which the trade talks are probably secretly heating up right now because Taylor is eligible to return off of the PUP in week 5. That is this coming week. For the Rams, Stafford, high volume passing day, over 300 passing yards. Puka Nacua got back to looking like what he has been the first couple weeks. 9 receptions, 163 yards, and a touchdown. He should be rostered in 100% of leagues right now anyways. If he, for some reason, is not, what the fuck? But Kyron Williams, also a name that people didn't really expect a bunch from, and has been very, very good. RB1, low-end RB1, RB2 numbers, had 103 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns, and 24 yards on 3 receptions. Alvin Kamara returned for the Saints today. That was not enough to help them. They lost to the Bucs 26-9. Kamara had a modest day rushing, which is not crazy. He had 51 total rushing yards. But the big thing was for PPR leagues, he was majority of their passing offense. He had 33 receiving yards, so not a ton, but he had 13 catches on 14 targets. That is a huge target share, especially for a running back. And that kind of wraps it up for the good news for the Saints. They let Baker and the Bucs roll all over him. Baker had 3 touchdowns and threw to Chris Godwin 8 times, 114 yards. So a big day for Chris Godwin. So moving on, we'll go out to Philly. It was a really fun game to watch. I actually watched the end of this one between Philly and the Commanders. Eagles were able to secure a win and go 4-0, and they won 34-31, but it required an overtime session. Sam Howell was sacked another 5 times today, which was kind of expected if you watched our show from yesterday. But still threw for nearly 300 yards and shows that he's a relatively above average quarterback right now, especially with how much he's getting sacked. If you were to give him some protection, I don't know what his ceiling really is at this point. But Scary Terry McLaurin, great day, 8 catches, 86 yards. But the bigger surprise here to me was Curtis Samuel, who kind of disappeared last year. He's been having a decent year so far, but really had a great day today. 7 catches, 51 yards, and 8 targets, and also ran for 1 touchdown. He's a little bit more of that multi-tool for him. He's not rostered in a lot of leagues, so continue to monitor his role. If it increases, if Sam Howell starts getting in the ball more, they're using him a little more as a gadget guy, he could be someone that would be a nice flex play potentially, at least someone to put on your bench. For the Eagles, Hurts had a great day statistically, but in general, just watching that offense, it does not seem like everything is clicking like it should be. They're not meeting their full potential, and this is actually kind of good news for Philly fans and people who have Philly players, because they had good stats today. They put up good numbers, and that means it's only going to get better for them. And that's kind of scary for the NFC teams. DeAndre Swift, he's firmly locked himself in as the lead back there, putting up low RB1 numbers. And that means that Kenneth Gainwell looked like the starter at the beginning of the year. He's a questionable player to even roster at this point, in my opinion. Going down to Houston, this is actually another fun one. Texans and CJ Stroud actually throttled the Steelers 30-6. Kenny Pickett went down with a knee injury. The extent is still unclear to that knee injury, but I'm pretty sure it had to be carted off, and they're awaiting MRI results. Pickett wasn't putting up good numbers to begin with, though. Not having a great year, like brought up. He had his first ever 2-touchdown game last week, which is not something you want to see from a professional NFL starting quarterback, especially not on a fantasy roster. But it still doesn't spell good news for other Pittsburgh players, offensive players, or if you have any Pittsburgh offensive players on your fantasy roster, because the backup quarterback is Mitchell Trubisky, and he is hot garbage. Najee Harris was able to get over 100 yards total between receiving and rushing today, but he's still only like a low-end RB2 at best in most cases. But then we can kind of move on from there to the fun stuff. CJ Stroud, if he is not rostered in your league, you need to go out and pick him up as soon as possible. Rookie quarterbacks are always kind of a scary proposition. You don't know how they're going to turn out. More often than not, they struggle, especially in year one. But he's shown to be a good passer kind of from the get-go. And he's only getting better. He's had 3 straight solid outings. In that span, 6 touchdowns, 1 interception, 970 total yards. It doesn't seem to be a fluke right now. Like, he seems to be very good. Every year, there's at least one quarterback who, for some reason, flies under the radar in fantasy for way longer than they should. Last year, it was Justin Fields. This year, I think it could be CJ Stroud. He's only rostered right now in ESPN leagues in 30.7% of the leagues. So if he is available, go out and get him. Nico Collins as well. He needs to be considered at least a flex player going forward. He's had a really solid season. I think going into the game, he was the 21st ranked wide receiver in fantasy. He is easily CJ Stroud's favorite target right now. He caught 7 passes today for 168 yards and 2 touchdowns. It was his best game of the year, but he's been in double digits the whole season. So definitely a guy that if you can somehow get your hands on him, he might be someone that you could trade for a little bit cheaper, but he actually is going to provide you a lot of benefit, especially once you start hitting the bye weeks. So on to my Minnesota Vikings. They tried their best today to continue to just let turnovers be the bane of our existence. We were trying to lose to this winless Panthers team, but we had a strong second half and led us to a 21-13 win, including a defensive touchdown, which was nice. Alexander Mattison had his second straight solid game running the ball, but he's still only posting up maybe RB2 numbers at best at this point. In addition, some of that running share is going to get taken away because Cam Akers actually played some today, his first full game starting with the Vikings. He was able to get 40 yards on 5 carries and really looked way more efficient when he was out there. His burst is a lot better. He was able to cut through the holes better than Madison, so he really could start to cut into some of Madison's carries here. Justin Jefferson owners are also going to be super happy. 6 catches, 85 yards, 2 touchdowns. He started off the year with no touchdowns and got his first one last week, so it's nice to see the gritty out there finally. For the Panthers, though, the only notes of fantasy relevant just really comes at receiver. If Adam Thielen is available in your league, shame on the owners for not having picked him up last week because he's showing that he is the safety blanket out there at receiver for Bryce Young. Also, Terrace Marshall had a really solid outing today, 9 catches on 10 targets for 56 yards. Once you start getting close to that double-digit target share, that's when you know that that receiver might have some decent options going forward, especially in fantasy in PPR leagues. So he'll be worth watching to see if he continues to get a heavy target share. And if he does, he might be someone that you want to stash on your bench. Out on the left coast, we had a battle of the dumbest coaches in the NFL. The Chargers were able to beat the Raiders 24-17, but LA still has some really serious questions about how far they can really go behind Staley as their head coach. And yes, he made more boneheaded decisions today. For the Raiders, they had to start Aiden O'Connell, their rookie quarterback, and replacing a Jimmy G. And he actually had a decent day for his first NFL start, as long as you don't look at the 3 fumbles that he had. And that's mostly due to the offensive line. Josh Jacobs did everything he could to try to help. Ran for 58 yards and touchdown and caught 8 balls for 81 yards. Devontae also had a decent day, but ended up suffering a shoulder injury, which he, I believe, came back from. But it's going to be worth monitoring going forward, because while they're playing in the game, they're going to get the injections and stuff like that, and they're going to keep on playing. But that's really going to stiffen up after the game. So we'll see his availability going into next week. Justin Herbert actually had a pretty down day today as well. Maybe he's starting to feel that impact of Mike Williams being out for the year with the ACL tear. Josh Palmer was able to kind of slot into his role and take some of those targets, but he had quite a few drops as well. A lot of targets, but not very many catches. He did lead the team, I believe, like 71 yards or something like that receiving. So he's someone that you might want to put on your bench, but I wouldn't feel comfortable starting at this point. Out in Dallas, we saw the worst loss of Bill Belichick's career, and it wasn't like a crazy loss. It was 38-3, not a good one, but still, for one of the best head coaches ever in the NFL, it was their worst loss today, and allowed the Cowboys to rebound after they were truly embarrassed this last week in Arizona. If I were you, I would stay away from all Patriots players outside of Ramondre Stevenson in fantasy football, just because, and even he had a bad day, but they have such instability at quarterback right now. Mac Jones looks absolutely terrible. He looks very much so like a Zach Wilson of old. And they ended up having to bench him at one point and put Bailey Zappi in. Bailey Zappi looks like Dollar Tree Mac Jones. So there's no significant or good options there passing wise, and it's going to limit the fantasy options for all those offensive players other than Ramondre Stevenson, who will get a bulk of the running work. But again, he even had a bad day today. For the Cowboys, we did see a really good defensive game, though. 3 turnovers, 2 touchdowns by the defense. And then the biggest fantasy implication for them would be the tight end, Jake Ferguson. It's a rough year for tight ends, so any sort of strong performance is going to be noticed, especially for tight ends that aren't usually rostered. So Ferg had 7 catches on 7 targets, 77 yards, a whole bunch of 7s. That is really solid numbers for a tight end this year. So he's someone worth watching. And if you need a tight end, he might be worth the pickup, just because tight ends are just such a rough play this year in fantasy. Let's see here. We have the Cardinals. They got their win last week, and I didn't expect them to really get any wins. But as much as you want to run with the Cardinals are tanking narrative, it's kind of becoming undeniable that this team has got a lot of grit, and they're going to find a way to win more games this year than just the one last week. That grit wasn't going to be enough for them today, though. They're going against the class of the NFC and the 49ers. Josh Dobbs, he's actually showing that he could be a quarterback that you want to consider rostering, though, in fantasy. He had 256 passing yards today, 2 touchdowns, ran 12 times for 48 yards. Having that versatility of being able to run and pass and not turn over the ball is really a solid thing. He might not be like a league winner for you, but he's going to be above average. He's going to be solid. You're not going to be disappointed with him. Marquise Brown and James Conner both showing that they're players that you should feel comfortable with playing as either a flex or an RB2 respectively. But then you look over at the 49ers, and it was mostly the usual suspects having an outstanding day. CMC, over 100 yards rushing, a hat trick of rushing touchdowns, and then added another touchdown in the air on one of his 7 catches. The dude is a beast. Real lucky if you got him. Probably the first or second overall pick, I'm assuming. Ayuk also had a really, really good day. The big area of concern here, though, is going to revolve around Deebo Samuel. So he had 0 passing targets today and ran 3 times and only got 6 yards. He also ended up picking up a knee injury to go along with the rib injury that he brought into today's game. This is a 49ers team that's going to be playing the Cowboys next week. This is probably going to be one of the bigger games next week. It's going to be big to monitor his status to see if he's going to be able to play. And if he does play, how effective he really is going to be, because he's nursing a whole bunch of injuries. Finally, we get to wrap up the night with the Kansas City Swifties versus the New York Aaron Rodgers. Game ended up being a lot better than it really expected it to be. And then coming down to the end, but the Chiefs were able to pull out a 23-20 win. Mahomes had an off night, I would say. He threw 2 interceptions, which has only happened, I think, 6 times in his career. But he made sure to get Kelsey a solid 6 catches for 60 yards, so that way his biggest fan would be happy. Isaiah Pacheco, though, one of the best nights, if not the best night of his career. Over 100 yards rushing and a touchdown on the ground, 3 catches for 43 yards. He's looking like a real solid RB option there if you got him. Mahomes did spread the ball around otherwise, though, targeting 10 different players, and this is why it's really tough. It's going to water down your options when it comes to fantasy. So if you want to roster a Kansas City player, we're all looking for, obviously Kelsey's going to get probably the lion's share of targets there, but we're all looking for, is there going to be one guy that starts to stand out for Kansas City? After Tyreek left last year, we were looking for that in any of those players, and no one really rose to the top. It just was a platoon system, and they're spreading the ball all over the place. Every once in a while, you have one player stand out, but it'll be a different guy each week. So that makes it really tough to focus on any one of those Chiefs players, any of those Chiefs receivers specifically, and say this is a guy going forward that you should have rostered or even consider playing in your flex. For the Jets, things did not start out great offensively. They had a jack-off show in the beginning where they showed off their geriatric hippie gimp quarterback, then put him up in the box. And of course, the broadcast had to keep showing him. But from there, it was, a couple pretty poor drives. And then the surprise was that Zach Wilson started to look good. He started the game looking like Zach Wilson and then just kind of got better as the game went along. His first drive in the second half, was really damn good. He was very efficient, able to throw for a touch. He was throwing really tight window back shoulder throws, and was able to throw one of those for a touchdown. And then they went for 2, and he was able to run it in for a touchdown on kind of a broken play. Looked really good. Finished the night with 245 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, and he did have a fumble, but no interceptions. But don't let this sway you into thinking that you need to pick him up in fantasy by any means. So, there's no consistency there yet, and we've seen what Zach Wilson is. He's pretty bad. Other thing that we did learn for sure tonight, though, if you didn't already kind of know it, is that Dalvin Cook is cooked. He's really no longer relevant in fantasy. He's not even really worth rostering in a lot of leagues. But with that kind of wraps it up for our day in review here. This actually went a lot longer than I expected it to. Maybe I made too many notes, but hey, we got tomorrow night still. We got our Monday night matchup between the Seahawks and the Giants. Saquon Barkley is going to be out. You have Matt Breida starting there at running back. That's the main significant kind of fantasy watch there. If you're somehow need a running back because you didn't play someone, Breida should potentially be there in a lot of leagues, so you can go out and try to play him. But other than that, this has been the first ever little late night Lineman Lounge recap of the football week, and focus on fantasy. So everybody, let me know what you think of this. Let us know on the socials. Hit me or Mike up. Let us know what we did good here, did bad here, how we can get better. Because this is something that if you, the fans, want, we can definitely try to make this more of a regular thing, put it out to you. Anyways, thanks for tuning in. Hope you have a good rest of your week, and we'll catch you on the flip side. See you.